I'm Steve Ledoux. I'm the town manager here in Acton, and today we're going to be talking to Katie Green, the chair of the Board of Selectmen, about the various budget items that will be in front of town meeting starting April 4th at the Acton Boxborough Regional High School Auditorium. Obviously, annual town meeting starts at night, and there are a lot of items that will be under consideration, but the budget is one of the bigger items that the town will vote on. I think it's important for folks to understand the budget process that the town goes through, because it's quite a lengthy process. I, as town manager, send out budget directives and budget forms to all our department heads in August. They spend pretty much the month of September putting their budget requests together. In October, we have a two-day session where the department heads present their recommended budgets to me and my budget team. And then after that, we spend pretty much all of October and November and probably half of December trying to put the budget together. And I utilize kind of a team approach on the budget. So in addition to myself, there's Steve Barrett, the finance director, Brian McMullen, the assistant finance director, Lisa Kraus, the town accountant, Marianne Fleckner, the human resource director, Mark Hall, the assistant town manager, and because of his vast years of experience, we've brought in Frank Widmeyer, the police chief, who's been around the block in the budget process, probably over 20 years in the town of Acton. So, under the town charter, the town manager has to present a recommended budget to the selectmen 100 days before town meeting, so right around Christmas time, roughly. So I make that presentation to the board. In early January, we have an all-day budget review session with the selectmen and the finance committee where they hear the budgets of each town department. The selectmen then have to vote a recommended budget that is sent to finance committee for their recommendation 60 days before town meeting or early February. And in essence, that's how we get to where we are for the town meeting warrant. So, Katie, why don't you tell us what is the total recommended spending package for the town that the voters will be seeing at town meeting on April 4th?
Great, thanks, Steve. The total recommended budget this year is $32,656,604. This includes both the operating budget, subsidies, and capital. And this represents a 2.2% increase over the FY16 budget.
Okay, so you mentioned that total spending package includes the operational budget, capital, and subsidies. How does that break down? How does the budget break down by those three categories?
Sure. So obviously the largest part is the operating budget. The operating budget is $32,247,604. The subsidies this year are lower at $247,000, and then the proposed capital is $162,000, and that's how we get to the total budget.
So how has the budget changed from the current fiscal year?
Right. So the operating budget is only up 2.48% over last year. So from about a little under 31.5 to the 32.2 million. The subsidies are down significantly, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and that's down from 398,000 to 247,000, which is a 38% decrease. And then the capital budget is up. It looks like a large percentage increase of 83,000, but really it's on a small number, so it's up from 88,000 to 162,000. And that's, again, the total budget, the whole spending package is only up 2.2% over last year.
Okay. When we talk about subsidies, what do we mean about subsidies?
Yeah, sure. So a subsidy is when we take money from the general fund and put it towards an enterprise fund to fund specific issues.
Okay. What are the subsidies recommended for FY17?
So this year we're recommending $245,000 for the Transportation Enterprise Fund. We're actually recommending no subsidy to the Ambulance Enterprise, which is why you see that decrease, and then $2,000, which goes annually to the Cultural Council. So that's where you get the total of $247,000.
Okay. What capital projects are being recommended for this budget?
So the main capital project The 162,000 that you see in there is actually for painting Town Hall. This is a project we've put off for a few years, but is long overdue. So that would cover that project. And then there's also funding for the Kelly's Corner design, which will be bonding. So you see on there that it's $756,000, but we won't actually be spending that in this fiscal year. We'll be bonding that over a number of years. And that will be dealt with in a separate warrant article. Article 23, I believe.
23, correct.
Yep.
And I think the viewers should know that the reason we're not voting the Kelly's Corner article with the other budget components is the fact that there's some significant zoning changes that are part of the Kelly's Corner package, and those zoning changes will be taken up first before this capital article, because if for whatever reason the zoning article doesn't pass, it doesn't make a lot of sense to move forward on the capital. So that kind of a little different order of articles than maybe what you're accustomed to in the past. So we have painting Town Hall on the list. What color is that going to be?
Right, that's a question we've gotten a lot. We are not going to decide the color at town meeting, but it is a discussion that the Board of Selectmen will have at a future date in consultation with boards like the Historic District Commission. And in the past, we have hired a paint consultant who looked at what the historic colors of Town Hall were. So we will take all of that information under consideration. But at town meeting, again, we'll just be voting to authorize the spending of the $162,000.
Now, the total budget, and we're not really talking about the school budget, is a pretty large number. So how does, what are the major components of revenue that we utilize to pay for a budget our
Sure.
size?
So you can see in the chart here that obviously they'll by far the largest chunk is coming from the tax levy. So this is everybody's property taxes. So we get the vast majority of our funding from there, 86%. And then others are really from smaller amounts, 4% from the excise taxes, 2% from fees that people pay. It says 4% for debt. That's sort of the debt exclusion that we voted in the past. 1% is from state aid. This only includes the state aid for the town budget. The schools, the Chapter 78 is kind of taken out of their assessment separately. And then about 3% is our use of reserves.
Okay, thank you. So the flip side, what are the main components of the town's operational budget?
Right, well, we're in the service business, so no surprise, the largest part of our budget is for people. So the salaries make up about 43% of our budget, and then the fringe benefits, which are another 26%. So all told, the kind of funding for people is about 70% of our budget. And then again, smaller things for our capital debt at 9%, the services and supplies about 14%, utilities and legal at 1%. Fortunately, this year snow only about 2% of our budget, and the infrastructure is about 5%.
Right, and it's important to note, I think, that town government, and it's pretty similar through at least other communities I've worked in, that the 70% of the budget is personnel. When you think about, we have police officers on the streets, firefighters. I mean, we are a personnel-driven organization, and even if you look at the kind of the school breakdown, it'd be pretty similar as well with teachers and all the staff that goes on running the school. What are some of the features of the FY17 budget that people should know about?
Sure. Well, the budget continues our senior tax relief program that's been very successful to offer tax relief for those on fixed incomes in our community. It also implements a number of the selectmen's goals, which we set annually in the summer. It eliminates, the general fund subsidy this year to the ambulance enterprise fund, as we mentioned earlier. It has the Kelly's Corner design, which again will be discussed in Article 23. There is funding for a fire engine, an ambulance, and a shift commander's vehicle. And we also replenish the stabilization fund with $1.8 million from free cash. As everybody will remember, we took that $1.8 million out of the stabilization fund at a special town meeting in August to buy the Walker property on Route 27, and we are proposing to put that money back, $1.8 million back from free cash into the stabilization fund.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about, probably the last 3 or 4 years, about OPEB, which means other personnel employee benefits. It's really about kind of the unfunded liability going forward of current employees, that the costs that'll carry forward when they retire, such as health insurance and things like that. So we've been funding this for several years now. Can you talk a little about how we're doing with our OPEB liability?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, we have been funding it and been forward thinking on this, and so we're happy to say that we are doing quite well. And so this chart shows our OPEB liability. We're reevaluated every 2 years, and in the current evaluation, they are showing that if we continue at the funding rate that we currently are on, that we will have essentially paid off our liability by 2030. So we're really making great progress. We're a forward-thinking community on this, and unlike a lot of other towns or entities that are seeing their liability increase, we're seeing ours go down because of the steps that we've been taking over the past few years.
Right, and this chart is really based on the assumption that the town will contribute $600,000 a year towards OPEB, which is also part of the operational budget that'll be before town meeting. Now, one of the unique things about Acton, at least in my experience working in other communities, is the entity we call the Acton Leadership Group, which for folks who may not be familiar with the concept, it's 2 representatives of the selectmen, 2 representatives of the school committee, 2 representatives of the finance committee, 2 people from town administration, 2 people from school administration. And the process really is to build consensus so that we don't have disagreements or fights at town meeting about the budget and how the budget is distributed. Can you talk a little about the consensus that was arrived at by the Acton Leadership Group for this fiscal year going into town meeting?
Sure. So we had the proposed budget that you had proposed back in December. The schools had their budget. Both of us, sort of went through the process of looking at those and ultimately voted our final budgets. The town actually then subsequently decreased our budget by about $200,000 in order to make it more palatable for the ALG group for the sort of overall spending number for the town. And to pay for all of this, we also agreed to only tax to the 2.5% allowed under Proposition 2.5, and not use any of the untaxed levy capacity, which this year we could have used up to $985,000, but we're leaving sort of all of that on the table to not tax beyond the 2.5%. And then we're using about $2.47 million out of our reserve fund for this year, and that is what the ALG group agreed to for FY17.
And all 3 major entities, the town, the selectmen, the schools, and the finance committee, all have agreed with this.
Correct.
So if you had to summarize the budget going to town meeting, how would you summarize it?
Sure. Well, I would say that it's a responsible budget. It's a level service budget. We're not proposing any new FTEs or any new major services. And again, it's the total spending package that we propose, we think meets the goals of ALG. It meets the point of view from the Finance Committee by falling well under their recommended 3% spending target. We again are only at 2.2%. We fully fund OPEB at the $600,000, which is under the operating budget. And, again, we don't increase the municipal FTE count at all. So this is really, I would say, a responsible and level service budget.
Excellent. Well, we've been talking with Katie Green, Chair of the Board of Selectmen, and we've been talking about the town operational budget and capital budgets that will be in front of town meeting April 4th. So a reminder for folks, town meeting starts April 4th, 7 p.m. at the Acton Boxborough Auditorium. And Katie, I'd like to thank you for being on the show, and we'll see you all at town meeting. Thank you.